When Burt Reynolds saw the blood pooling beneath the stuntman's body, he didn't call for the medic. He didn't check if the cameras were still rolling. He didn't ask how bad the injury was. He did something that would end his relationship with the biggest studio in Hollywood, cost him millions in future contracts, and transform him from just another movie star into a legend that stuntmen still talk about 50 years later. He walked across that soundstage, past 200 frozen crew members, directly to the man responsible, and in front of everyone, actors, producers, executives who'd flown in from Los Angeles, Burt Reynolds said two words that nobody had ever said to a director on a major Hollywood production. "You're fired!" The soundstage erupted. People gasped. The director stood frozen, unable to process what he just heard. But Burt wasn't finished. What he did in the next 8 minutes would change Hollywood forever. But to understand why those two words mattered so much, you need to know what brought Burt Reynolds to that moment. It was July 1977, and Burt Reynolds was at the absolute peak of his career. Smokey and the Bandit had just made him the biggest box office draw in America. His face was on magazine covers. His mustache was iconic. Directors lined up to work with him. But Burt Reynolds understood physical pain in a way most Hollywood stars never would. In 1959, he'd been a college football star with a future in the NFL. Then came the car accident that shattered his knee and ended those dreams forever. He'd rebuilt himself as an actor, but the pain never left. By the early 1970s, he was doing his own stunts in films like Deliverance, where he insisted on performing the dangerous canoe sequences himself. That decision nearly killed him. During one take, Burt went over a waterfall and hit his spine on a rock. The injury was catastrophic, a fractured tailbone that would cause him pain for the rest of his life. Doctors told him he'd been 1 inch away from permanent paralysis. Most actors would have learned to leave dangerous work to professionals after an experience like that. But Burt learned something different. He learned that stuntmen were the true heroes of action movies, and they deserved to be protected. Which is why, when he arrived on the set of Blood Run and met the director, Burt immediately sensed trouble. Marcus Westfield was exactly the kind of director Hollywood loved in the 1970s. He brought films in under budget. He worked fast. He didn't tolerate complaints. And if someone got hurt making one of his pictures, well, that was the cost of doing business. The crew had nicknamed him Mad Marcus for his obsessive commitment to getting dangerous shots, no matter the risk. On the first day of production, Westfield laid out his vision for the film's climactic sequence. The hero, played by Burt, would fight the villain inside a burning warehouse, surrounded by real flames and actual explosions. No green screen, no safety nets. "This is going to be the most realistic fire sequence ever put on film," Westfield announced to the assembled crew of 200. "When audiences see this, they'll know it's real." Burt studied the storyboards. The sequence required the stunt team to work within feet of controlled explosions, while fire burned on 3 sides. "What about safety protocols?" Burt asked. Westfield smiled that thin smile directors get when actors question their authority. "Mr. Reynolds, I've been making action pictures for 15 years. Nobody has ever died on one of my sets." "Yet," Burt said quietly. "Nobody has died yet." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Westfield's smile disappeared. "Are you questioning my competence?" "I'm questioning your priorities," Burt replied. "These stuntmen have families. We need to make sure we're protecting them." Westfield's face hardened. "If you're not comfortable with real action, Mr. Reynolds, perhaps you should stick to comedies." It was a calculated insult, delivered in front of the entire crew. Burt could have walked away, but he looked at the stunt team, young men who needed the work, and made a decision. He stayed. It was a choice he'd later realize was both the best and worst of his career. For 3 weeks, Marcus Westfield pushed harder every day. Explosions closer, fire hotter, safety margins disappeared. Jake Morrison, the stunt coordinator, kept warning him. "The fire sequences are too close. The explosion timing is too tight." Westfield's response never changed. "We're making a movie, not conducting a safety seminar." Burt watched the stuntmen's faces. He saw fear. These men knew the conditions were dangerous, but speaking up meant never working again. So they stayed silent and hoped their luck would hold. Inside Stage 9, the temperature hit 95 degrees. The warehouse set was ready. The fire effects were loaded. Everything prepared for the big stunt. Burt felt it in his bones. Something bad was coming. He'd felt this way before, right before his spine hit that rock in the river. But this time, it wasn't his body on the line. The stuntman who would risk everything had a name. Tommy Hendricks. Tommy Hendricks. 28 years old. Married. Baby daughter. He showed everyone pictures during lunch breaks. He talked about his dreams, becoming a stunt coordinator, maybe a director. He studied film at night school. "I don't want to be just a body getting thrown around," he told Burt. The shot? Tommy thrown backward by explosion, fall into burning debris, roll twice, come up fighting. 6 seconds. Perfect timing required. They rehearsed 3 times. Each time, Jake Morrison warned the explosion was too close. "Move the charge 3 feet further," Jake said. "The shot won't look right," Westfield replied. "Tommy can handle it." Tommy didn't argue. He needed the job. Burt watched from Video Village. Something felt wrong, but if he challenged Westfield again, it might make things worse for everyone. He chose silence, a decision he'd regret forever. July 23rd. Tommy checked his gear, reviewed the choreography, looked at his family photo. Jake pulled him aside. "You don't have to do this." "I've got this," Tommy said. His hands were shaking. Westfield called action. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The explosion went off exactly as planned, which was the problem. July 23rd, 1977. The day everything changed. Westfield called for the warehouse fire sequence. This would be the big stunt, the moment the trailer would showcase the shot that would define the film. Tommy Hendricks went through his final preparations. He checked his protective gear. He reviewed the choreography one more time. He looked at a photo of his wife and daughter that he kept in his wallet. Jake Morrison pulled him aside. "You don't have to do this if you don't feel right about it." Tommy smiled. "I'm good, Jake. I've got this." But his hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough that someone who knew what to look for would notice. Burt noticed. He almost said something, almost walked over and demanded they postpone the shot until they could review the safety setup one more time. But the words died in his throat because he knew what would happen. Westfield would say he was being difficult, the producers would pressure him to let the professionals do their jobs, and Tommy might lose the gig entirely. So Burt stayed at Video Village, watching on the monitors, hoping his instincts were wrong. Westfield called for quiet on the set. The fire team lit their effects. Orange flames erupted around the warehouse set, controlled but intense. The heat was suffocating. Action! The cameras rolled. The explosion was set to go off in 5 seconds. Tommy positioned himself, muscles tensed, ready to be thrown backward by the blast. 5 seconds. 4, 3. Burt's hands gripped the edge of the monitor table. 2, 1. The explosion went off exactly as planned, which was the problem. The blast wave hit Tommy before he'd fully committed to his fall. Instead of being thrown backward in a controlled stunt, he was ragdolled through the air like a child's toy. He hit the burning debris at the wrong angle. His right arm plunged into flames that weren't supposed to touch him. For 3 seconds, Tommy didn't scream. He rolled away from the fire like the professional he was, came to his feet, and even started to continue the scene. But Burt, watching on the monitor, saw what happened next. Tommy's legs gave out. He dropped to his knees, and that's when they saw it. Blood. The explosion had sent a piece of metal debris, part of the warehouse set, slicing across Tommy's shoulder. The cut was deep, and in the heat and chaos, nobody had noticed. Tommy had been moving on pure adrenaline, not realizing how badly he'd been hurt. Now, as the adrenaline wore off, the injury became visible. Blood was soaking through his costume, spreading in a dark stain that looked black against the orange glow of the surrounding fire. "Cut! Cut!" someone was screaming. The fire team moved in with extinguishers. The medics grabbed their equipment and sprinted onto the set. And Burt Reynolds felt something inside him snap. He didn't remember walking onto the set. Later, crew members would tell him that he moved like a man possessed, crossing the distance in seconds. But Burt's memory of that moment was different. In his memory, he was back in that river in Georgia, feeling his spine crack against the rock. knowing he'd just destroyed his body for a movie that didn't care whether he lived or died. When he reached Tommy, the medics were already working. Tommy was conscious, embarrassed, apologizing. "I'm okay," he kept saying. "I can do it again. Just give me a few minutes." That's when Burt heard Marcus Westfield's voice cutting through the chaos. "How long until we can reset? We're losing light. I need to get the shot today." 200 people stopped breathing. Burt turned slowly. The entire soundstage had gone quiet. "What did you just say?" His voice was soft, dangerous. Westfield didn't notice. "I said we need to reset. We can use Tommy's double for the next take." "There's a man bleeding on your set," Burt interrupted. "And you're worried about losing light?" Now Westfield noticed the tone. "Mr. Reynolds, I understand you're upset, but we have a schedule." "Shut up!" The two words hit like a slap. Nobody told directors to shut up, especially not on their own sets. Burt walked toward Westfield. The director, sensing danger, took a step back. "I've been watching you for 3 weeks," Burt said. His voice was still quiet, but it carried across the entire soundstage. "I've watched you push these men harder and harder. I've watched you ignore safety protocols. I've watched you treat human beings like props you can break and replace." "I don't have to listen to this," Westfield started. "Yes, you do, because I'm not finished." Burt was close now. "Tommy is 28 years old. He has a wife and a baby, and he's lying over there bleeding because you wanted your shot to look real. Because you were too arrogant to listen when your stunt coordinator told you the explosion was too close." Westfield's face turned red. "That's not fair. Accidents happen." "This wasn't an accident. This was a negligence." Burt turned to face the assembled crowd. 200 people watched in absolute silence. He could see it in their faces. Years of frustration, fear, anger. Every unsafe condition they'd tolerated. Every injury they'd seen. Every time they'd stayed quiet because speaking up meant losing their jobs. This was their moment too, and Burt was going to give them their voice. He turned back to Westfield. "You're fired." The soundstage erupted. People gasped. Someone dropped a clipboard, and the clatter echoed like a gunshot. Westfield stood frozen. "You can't fire me. You're the actor. You don't have that authority. Watch me." Burt looked at the line producer, a woman named Sandra Hayes. "Sandra, you're in charge now. This set doesn't resume until every safety protocol has been reviewed and upgraded. You don't shoot another frame until Jake Morrison personally signs off on every stunt. And Marcus Westfield doesn't set foot on this lot again." Sandra Hayes was calculating her job, her career, the studio's reaction. Then she looked at Tommy, still bleeding, still apologizing. Something shifted in her face. "You heard him," she said to Westfield. "You need to leave." What happened next would become Hollywood legend. Marcus Westfield, a director with 15 years of experience, was escorted off his own set by security. Studio executives scrambled to their phones. The entire production ground to a halt, and Burt Reynolds sat down next to Tommy Hendricks, held the young man's hand while the medics finished bandaging his shoulder, and said something that Tommy would repeat for the rest of his life. "This business will try to convince you that you don't matter, that you're replaceable, that the shot is more important than the person. Don't ever believe that. You matter. Your life matters. And any director who doesn't understand that has no business making movies." The fallout was immediate and severe. The studio suspended production. They threatened to sue Burt for breach of contract. They leaked stories about a difficult star who destroyed a major production. But then something unexpected happened. The stunt community spoke up. Every major stuntman in Hollywood, the guys who'd been thrown through windows, set on fire, and crashed cars for decades, came forward with their own stories about Marcus Westfield. About corners cut, safety ignored, injuries hidden. Within a week, the narrative shifted. Burt wasn't a difficult star. He was a hero. The Screen Actors Guild launched an investigation into safety practices on action films. New regulations were written. Insurance requirements were strengthened. And Marcus Westfield, despite his 15 years of experience, found that studios were suddenly unwilling to hire him. Blood Run was eventually completed under a new director with upgraded safety protocols. It made a modest profit and was forgotten within a year. But what Burt did on that soundstage, Those two words he said in front of 200 witnesses became the moment that changed him from movie star to legend. Tommy Hendricks recovered fully. He continued working as a stuntman for another 20 years, and in every interview he gave, he told the story of the day Burt Reynolds stopped a production to save his life. Burt never bragged about what he did. When reporters asked, he'd shrug and say, "I just did what anyone should do. You protect people. That's not heroic, that's basic human decency." But the stunt community never forgot. When Burt died in 2018, his funeral was attended by dozens of stuntmen, many he'd never worked with, many who weren't even born when the incident happened. The director, Hal Needham, summed it up in a memorial speech. Burt understood something most people in this business never learn. The shot doesn't matter. The schedule doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that everyone goes home alive at the end of the day. That soundstage in 1977 was hot, loud, and chaotic. 200 people watched one man make a choice that would define the rest of his life. He saw blood. He saw negligence. He saw a system that treated human beings as expendable. And he said two words that changed everything. "You're fired." 50 years later, stuntmen still tell the story. Because in Hollywood, a town built on illusion and spectacle, Burt Reynolds proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to look away when someone needs help. He didn't save just one life that day. He saved hundreds. Every stuntman who works under better safety conditions, every crew member who feels empowered to speak up about danger, every actor who understands that their privilege comes with responsibility. That's Burt Reynolds' real legacy, not the movies, not the mustache, not the magazine covers. Two words, 200 witnesses, and a promise that in his Hollywood, human life would always matter more than the perfect shot.